Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for coming to the staff meeting. We have a lot on our agenda that I'd like to discuss today. First, I'm going to talk about Amy, our new deaf specialist that we hired back in January. Everything's been going great. She's been able to come in and take a lot off my shoulders. She's been doing a lot around the office, focusing on consumers and giving information and resources, and everything there is going well. We've been slowly adding more and more to her plate, which is freeing me up to focus on my own projects, such as the domestic violence, emergency response, coordinating travel to a bunch of different sites for different things, so I'm really glad to have her here. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the Deaf Expo that was last Saturday. Does anyone have any comments or anything about the event?
Yeah, Deaf Expo was really well attended. It was a crowded facility. We had a booth, and we were busy all day, as is the normal at Deaf Nation. There were several different exhibitors, businesses, and churches had booths. So it was a great turnout. We were happy to be there.
About how many would you say stopped at the ACHA? Do you have numbers on that?
If I could do a rough estimate, I would say probably 200 to 300.
Excellent.
Great. Can you think of anywhere to improve for next year? Any feedback?
I would say we should probably have some more staff there at the booth because the staff we had were very inundated with questions and they were very busy all day. It was hard to take a break.
Yes, that's a really good idea. I know for myself, we were working in a split shift, so there were a lot of people and it was difficult to manage the flow of traffic. You would have people that you were having a conversation with and more people asking questions at the same time. It was very overwhelming, just a line out the door. I personally was standing for 4 hours straight with very little time to take maybe a minute at a time break before having to jump right back in. So that was a challenge. I really think that's a good idea, that we should have more specialists and staff simultaneously at the next event. So hopefully next year we will have that. Thank you for that feedback. Next thing I want to talk about is the statewide conference. Sherry Collins was discussing that she wanted to have the Arizona statewide conference directly after the 2016 NAD conference. And that way, people are already here in Phoenix for that conference, and it'll just be an additional 2 or 3 days for them to stay. Do you have any ideas of things that we should focus on? What types of workshops we should have for that?
Do we know for sure yet what tracks we're going to be focusing on for the statewide conference? Is there a specific targeted audience yet?
Yes, it looks like Sherry Collins has been conversing with Jennifer with the Family Youth Resources, and we have decided that they want to have a track specifically relating to family and youth support services. We know that we want to have that track, but we're not exactly sure what we want to teach, what kind of information we want to put in those workshops or the conference. Do you have any ideas of what you think people might want to see?
I would say something maybe for special educators, so teachers would be great, and then if you could offer TUs, that's always a perk for teachers, but then we would have to work with the Department of Education, so it could get a little steep.
I'm not sure if we need a track for interpreters at that point because we're going to have Region 5 in Phoenix and then NAD in Phoenix, and so I don't know if we really need a track for interpreters, but we can look into it. Maybe some of the conferences will have some multiple applications, educators, parents, and/or interpreters, etc.
So I'm thinking maybe we should have something more of like a workshop specifically relating to educational interpreters instead of just interpreters in general. We know Region 5 is going to have something specifically relating to the EIPA for educational interpreters. So I'm thinking maybe if they show a lot of interest, we could have another conference that would just be an extra 2 to 3 days after that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering, I know that we have about 400 licensed interpreter, but I'm not sure how many of them are educational interpreter. I know some of them also do educational interpreting, but I don't know how many are strictly educational interpreting.
And they're estimating roughly, well, it's very rough, but 200 to 300 who just do educational and are not licensed. We currently have, last check, 388 licensed interpreters, and some of them are also educational, but not very many of them are full-time K-12. In addition to the 388 licensed, we're estimating 200 to 300 only educational.
Wow, that's definitely new information to me. I thought the numbers were a lot less than that. So maybe with that, we might want to have a track specifically designed for educational interpreters. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is the different projects going forth. I've been really excited with all these opportunities that we've had, and we've been able to take them up. The first project I want to focus on is the mentorship program. Do you have any comments about that?
Sure.
What we're planning to do?
I just attended a conference in Salt Lake City that had a lot of information about new resources that are available for specialized areas of interpreting. So, for example, legal interpreting, trilingual, rehab, deaf interpreters, etc. Lots of new resources available that we can utilize to create our mentoring program. So the plan is eventually we will probably have 6 tracks for mentoring, but in terms of prioritizing our greatest need, we're going to start with just a basic hearing interpreter mentoring program for those who are trying to pass the NIC exam. And we will also prioritize mentoring for deaf interpreters. We currently have very little or perhaps no resources in the state for deaf interpreters wanting to become certified deaf interpreters, so we'll do that track as well. And we will also prioritize legal. I'm hoping to roll all 3 of those out at the same time, probably in the fall. And then coming later, we'll do a medical specialization, a mental health specialization, trilingual, and perhaps a VRS VRI, maybe. I'm still considering that one. So all of that is going to obviously take some time. The first 3, like I said, in the fall, and then the other ones will follow 6 months to a year later, depending on how much time I have to devote to that.
Do you have any idea what that kind of training is going to look like for those first 3 programs? Just
Sure.
like a basic idea?
The National Consortium for Interpreter Education Centers had a 10-year grant through RSA. And with that grant, they did a ton of research and needs assessments and looking into best practices for interpreting. From that information, they then created video materials, lesson plans, cultural training, linguistic training, all kinds of resources that are specific to interpreters in a variety of settings. And because that grant cycle is now up, all of those materials are being made available to the public. So what they did is they brought interpreter educators from all over the country, those who are teaching interpreters, running programs, and mentoring, into one big workshop, and allowed us to go through all of the materials, experiment with them, create lessons from them, create curricula from what they had available, and all of that is free for us to use.
Wow, that's really amazing. I'm really excited for that program, because I think that's really going to save us a lot of time, not having to work from scratch to develop our own. I think that I could benefit from some of those myself, so I think that's going to be a great program for us. So the last project I wanted to talk about was the Domestic Violence Conference. I know that we were kind of looking into interpreter training for that specific area. Do you have any idea what that's going to look like?
You and I are partnering with the Arizona Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence to create some awareness of the needs of the deaf community, make sure that shelters and programs for survivors are accessible, and as part of that, we want to make sure that there are interpreters available who are adequately and appropriately trained in working with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. So, at the conclusion of this 5-day conference, you and I will work together and work with the ACESDV to create the 2-day training that would be specific to the needs of the interpreters working in those settings, with the ultimate goal that that organization would have a list of trained, qualified interpreters, so that if an interpreter is needed at a shelter or a support group or what have you, there would be a list of interpreters who should and can take those assignments.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I know a lot of us in this room have heard over and over again that domestic violence organizations and shelters are really limited on funds, and they want to provide these services, but they keep running into problems when it comes to paying for the interpreter. So I think it's really great that we're having this opportunity to train interpreters specifically for that situation. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to work with ACESDV. I have to remember that acronym. Anyways, so hopefully we're going to be able to have that grant, which will allow us to fund those interpreting services as well. I know interpreters have a heart and don't mind working pro bono to give back to the community, but we know that they're willing, but we still feel like we should pay those interpreters for their services, because we don't want the interpreters to be looked at as helpers. We want them to be seen as paid professionals. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that's great. Thank you for all of the feedback that we got today. I'm really looking forward to 2015. It's definitely going to be a busy year, and I'm very excited.
Thanks, everybody.